The Gulf Injustice Podcast, the official podcast of Detained in Dubai with Radha Stirling.
Welcome to the Gulf Injustice Podcast. I'm Radha Stirling, and today I'm joined by Dr. John A. King, a trauma coach and author of The War After the War, a specialist in helping veterans navigate the battles that begin long after they leave the front line. His work focuses on PTSD, moral injury, and institutional betrayal, themes that strongly intersect with the cases I've handled involving American, British, and Irish veterans whose trauma was compounded by detention, legal injustice, and abandonment abroad. We'll be exploring what really happens when the uniform comes off and how veterans can win that war that follows service. Thanks for joining me, John. It's wonderful to be in contact and to learn about the amazing work that you do from Texas, USA. And I think that's the perfect location for the work you do. Obviously, there's a lot of veterans in Texas, and it seems to be one of those destinations that attracts them. I've personally had clients who have encountered issues in the UAE and then following that have relocated to Texas. So if you could just let me know about this book that you've recently written. I know you've actually produced a number of books, haven't you? So is this your latest?
Yeah, so this actually tied into, so I was trafficked as a kid by the people who raised me. And that led me, I had recall of that at 45. From there, I ended up involved in the back end of the Epstein case and the Nygaard case who took it on. So in this process, I met a whole range of veterans that were dealing with trauma on different levels. So coming out of that, I did a couple of documentaries, but coming out of that, I realized I want to get to the masses with it. And the best way to do that is through fictional novels. And the title you've got now is a non-working title. I don't know what the title's going to be by the time it comes out. But the current book looks at military sexual trauma and the impact of pre-existing conditions like adverse childhood experiences. And just if you start to put those two together, you can't get good fruit off a bad tree. And often veterans, police, first responders aren't reporting things that happened in their childhood because they're going to lose benefits, jobs, promotional opportunities. So you've got this constant cycle of compounding trauma that manifests poorly, both in civil service after they come back from the war. So you've got this incredible flux that's happening, and really no one's discussing the impact of those things.
Okay, that's interesting. When you talk about the compounding stress, say someone's already suffered a major traumatic event, whether that's sexual assault, whether it's a death on the battlefield, anything like that, and then compounding on that because it's not dealt with. Are you saying that as they get into the workforce, as they get married, as they experience trauma in other areas, that it compounds after that and sort of becomes maybe an issue too big for them to deal with alone?
Yes, and I think it even goes back further. Like the stats have varied, but between 20 and 85% of all veterans have had extreme childhood trauma. On the ACE scale, the average score is 1.6. For police officers, it's 4+. So you're looking at 4 times the natural of those officers, 4 times nearly 5 times the national average. They've had these incredible traumatic things. Paramedics, 38%, firefighters, 23%. So you've got these people going into front-facing careers because there's reasons they want to do it. For a lot with our especially our tip of the spear war fighters, it's you'll never mess with me and mine again. And so they go in there, and a lot of the trauma I've found they've had hasn't necessarily been about what they experienced in the sandbox. It was what started as a child that led them into that career. And now they're at the stage of life where they're reaping this compounding trauma and they can't discuss it. So you've got that. And then on top of it, you've got the whole mess that is military sexual trauma, which is a major challenge. that no one's talking about.
So do you think people who have experienced trauma earlier in life are attracted to careers where perhaps they can try to resolve those issues and overcome challenges?
That's the assumption I've come to. A couple of things. By the nature of PTSD, you've got the fight and flight and risky behavior result. There's nothing more risky than putting yourself in harm's way. And so particularly for the men, the fact that they weren't able to protect themselves at 6 and 7 years old, and even now as 20 and 30-year-old men, they look back and see, I should have been a man. And so to compensate for that, they put themselves in these very aggressive roles within our society. And this is left unresolved. And so you now got them in these incredible front-facing, hard, very risky occupations. And the trauma manifestation is disproportionate often to the situation that they're facing. So they're in a situation where they need calm and they're already in black. And so that's why we see some of the compounding that we're seeing with law enforcement around the world, I believe.
And so that's actually heightening their danger on the field, whether they're police or military officers. If they're reacting in that way when you experience calm, surely that's putting them at risk.
Yes, that is. And then when you're coming back from situations, they're only allowed to talk within the American institutions. You're only allowed to talk about what happened during your deployment. If you go back to your childhood, some of the people I've done, they're extreme war fighters. And what they did and were involved in on the battlefield never impacted them. It was a loss of a friend that might have, maybe afterwards, or it was what happened to them as a child. The case that really put me on this was a gentleman that was involved with the CIA and the NSA, a lot of wet work and black op stuff. And he never regretted doing what he did for God and country. What his triggering point is what was done to him as an 11-year-old boy by the mayor of his town who ran the baseball club, who drove his family out of town. That was the kernel. But he couldn't discuss that with the VA or the psychiatrist because he would have lost all these benefits. So that's where we started to work. And really that started up this whole rabbit warren of dealing with these men and sometimes women going, okay, well, this is a thing, and they really can't get help. And in the police, they've got the opportunity, they'll lose their career if they talk about pre-existing conditions.
There's certainly stigma attached and professional consequences, but in a sense, it's like, a pilot trying to pass his medical examination and he knows that he has some sight problem, but he's just trying to get through it, isn't it?
Yes.
So, I mean, it's unfortunate that that's where it's at. So where do you come in then? Do you come in after an event, or are you working with people who don't want to disclose, what's happened to them? Is that and they trust in your confidentiality and try to work through issues with you?
Yeah, that's really what we've done. We've set up so it took me about $300,000 and 15 years to recover. So we've taken all that information and we've made it available to people. So what I do is I step people through what is now a 2-year program and try and give them an opportunity to get ahead of this thing, because they're always playing behind. Their reactions are out there and they're always trying to drag this guilt and this condemnation forward with them. And so what I've tried to do is help them try and get ahead of that. And we do that outside of the workplace, outside of the VA, outside of the police reporting centers or whatever it is. And another element that we really started to touch on was this military sexual trauma, because particularly for the men, it's massively unreported. If you look at the statistics, they will say it's like 1 in 3 or 4 women and 30 to 40%, but only 1.5 men. But they're just not true figures. The estimation for women is about between 830 and 950,000. But for men, because of unreporting, it's 1.1 to 2.2 million. In fact, in the VA, 40% of all MST cases reported are men. So if you look at that alone, the guilt, the shame, the removal, those guys that have gone through that, they remove themselves from all relationships because they can't talk to their other tough buddies about what they allowed to happen to them. And so these guys, and that's where my background really does help some people like this, men and women. I understand there's no judgment. I know what this is like. And that's where we've really been able to help. And with the other case, with the people that are experiencing this stuff, the ability to have a voice external to their environment, I found very therapeutic for a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. I can imagine. And for people who can't talk about it with anyone else, even seeing you and others talk about it would be therapeutic for sure.
Yeah,
So
we've found that. Yeah.
do you mainly deal with people who have had trauma from their childhoods or people who have had trauma in other times of their lives?
Um, so you hear a phrase, little t, big T trauma, which is, sometimes a little derogatory. I'm not sure if it's very accurate. Trauma by its nature is trauma. How we respond to it is really based upon a range of different things. So what I've found with what we do is there's often and it's a misused term or it's an overused term, a triggering moment, or a moment that highlights this undercurrent of I just don't cope. And we normally take that moment and help people through just coaching exercises. Just identify one thing. But I've never, in the 15 years I've been trying to help people, I've never found that it's a single thing. It's often a link in a chain of a series of things. And I know even in my own case, I'm currently going through something, I'm 62, I've been in recovery for 17 years now. And a week ago, 2 weeks ago, it was like, what the heck is this? Which tracks back to a whole series of other things. What we try and do is give them a series of tools for their toolbox that they can use at different times. Because trauma and the recall of trauma and dealing with trauma is not a one-off thing. And I try to challenge people with the concept of you'll never get well, but you'll always be able to manage better than you are now. And some people take that as a negative stance. That's not been my case. I don't see that as negative. I think if every day I'm getting better at managing what I've dealt with, then that makes me a better man, a better husband, a better father. I think the one and done, which is a lot of to do with the Western mentality, microwave 30 seconds type sort of scenario, doesn't serve people with trauma.
Right. Um, that's interesting. So when you say that, you will never necessarily fully recover, and it's just something that you'll learn to manage as best you can. Now, I was watching a documentary that you were featured in, the one on Rumble. What was the name of that one?
Um, Light in the darkness.
Light in the Darkness. I'll put it in the links
Light in
below.
the
But
darkness. Yeah.
so they were saying that the brain chemistry actually changes when you suffer a traumatic event, and that it doesn't return to normal after that.
Yes, but you can. Yes, that is a statement, and that's a series of thoughts that I even think in the last half a dozen years have started to change. The brain's incredibly plastic. You can retrain it to respond differently to situations. But there is this sense that once it's in a particular groove, it's incredibly difficult to get it out of that groove and that cycle. And even when you do, it's very easy for it to slip back into that groove. So that's the concept of the toolbox that I came up with. It was like, if I can learn the things that work in certain situations, when I'm faced with those situations, I can reach for a tool to use it. That doesn't make me a long-term disabled or a person that's always going to suffer from their disability. It makes me a long-term manager. What it is a switch in my mindset from being disappointed because I'm not normal to being encouraged because I am able to interact with people in a more successful manner.
Okay. All right. And what about institutional abandonment? Is that something that you come across with your veterans, that they feel after suffering a traumatic event or after the accumulating effects that's causing them to suffer from PTSD and other illnesses, essentially. Do any of them feel that they've been abandoned by the system, and does that have an effect on them?
Yes, to both. I just recently was sitting with a gentleman that um, he's probably one of the most decorated sergeants in all of American military history, and he's just been sent home to die. He was in the sand, he was in Blackwater, he was with the burn
Mm,
pits, and just there just a sense of being isolated, having done and been exposed for these things, and now he's having trouble feeding his family, paying the mortgages, paying the rent. And the pressure he's got is there's a level, he's applied for disability and he could possibly get it, but if he dies before he gets it, then his family will never have the medical benefits or the pension. So he's got two disabled children, and so the pressure he's feeling is he's been told he was being told he's got 3 to 4 months to live, and he needs someone to return a phone call and fill in some paperwork,
mm,
and it compounds that whole frustration. And I've seen that, and with my Indigenous family in Australia, the sense of abandonment that they've gone through from governments and institutions there. So, I found myself in this pocket for the
mm.
last 2 or 3 years across the globe, dealing with these institutions that are really disingenuous. If they would just say, "Hey, listen, we want you to come and fight with you for us and kill a lot of bad guys, and when you come home, we're just going to totally leave you alone," that'd
Mm.
be okay. I can deal with that. Or, "Hey, you're an Indigenous Australia. Look, sorry, we've raped your wives, killed all your babies, and we've taken your nation, and you're never getting it back." Instead of, "Hey, listen, why don't we do a welcome to country and pat you on your head?" And it's really just, it's just old sugar bagging.
Mm.
Because there's this sense of hope. We can have hope.
That's
And then
right.
when
The
hope,
closure allows you to kind of move
yeah,
forward, doesn't it? You know it's not going to
yeah,
happen. It might upset you, it might make you angry, but you're not going to think about it too much after that, are you? You're
no,
going to look at other solutions or what else
yeah,
can we do? And yeah, it creates that closure. I think it's in, relationships as well that are just
yeah,
drawn out and, when people finally separate, there's a sense of
yeah.
relief.
Yes, there
And
is. And
yeah.
you're talking about a relationship between a man or a woman and the US government to serve their country, or
Mm,
between Imbrani Indigenous Australians and the government and the land rights, and that we have a chance to have a future for our children's children. We were stolen generation. Okay, great. That's unfortunate, but my children don't have to go through that. And if there was this moral contract that was kept, then you can actually plan for hope. But when
mm.
there's this constant disappointment, disillusionment, non-fulfillment, that whole cycle,
Cycle. Yeah.
and it's like, well, and that's when I think it leads to hopelessness.
Mm.
Because disappointment arises out of unmet expectation. Hopelessness is the epitome of that disappointment.
Mm. And do you find, I mean, a pattern that I see just naturally in my work is that people who are suffering tend to want to maybe relocate or move to another country, keep on the move, maybe to keep
Yeah,
their mind off things. So, when you sit still for a while, you think too much. So if you're constantly on the move, I mean, they do say that exercise helps when you're,
yeah,
suffering anxiety and so on. So perhaps it's almost an extreme reaction, but a lot of them go on into join private military groups or private security, taking them down the Suez Canal to battle pirates or, whatever it is, just anything but sit still.
yeah.
And I mean, that's when a lot of my clients get into trouble. I had Perry Coppins was arrested over his PTSD medication in the UAE and he was imprisoned. And
Wow.
I mean, we've had dozens of veterans, American veterans, arrested in the UAE and other Middle Eastern countries, Qatar. And I think, to go from that needing to be on the move and needing to be free to suddenly locked up in a desert prison, I mean, that obviously that compounds things. But I think for a lot of them, it's a real shock that their own governments don't help as much as they thought. And, some of them were in prison for over a year without their government doing anything, despite
Yeah,
having committed like zero crime. And in the end, the courts exonerated them. and, apologized and let them go. But that was it. 1 year in prison, and, you lose your family, you lose your wife. It's just too much pressure and stress. And it's almost like the final nail in the coffin, these sorts of experiences for a lot of sufferers and their families as well. It's just, oh no, we can't cope with any more stress that we've had over the
Yeah,
past, and it
I
has
do.
really drastic effects. And I think, I don't know whether you've seen, but over the past year or so since Trump's been in office, we've had three veterans, and I was just so impressed with JD Vance and Trump personally getting involved with these clients who were veterans and having them sent home from Dubai, from Abu Dhabi within, a couple of weeks, which is
Yeah,
almost unheard of when you've seen people jailed for a year or
yeah,
more, and the governments haven't done anything. And then to see this, it it gave those three people who were assisted, it gave them hope, it gave them faith. They went back to the US and rebuilt their lives very, very quickly with
yeah.
this passion and enthusiasm that's
For their,
incredible.
yeah,
They felt suddenly like so blessed and happy. They
yeah,
weren't failed by their government. Someone cared for them. Someone went
yeah,
out of their way to rescue them, essentially. And to watch their reactions in comparison to some of the other
yeah.
veterans who weren't supported in that way is incredible. But I mean, I was going to ask you, do you have any tips for people facing that sort of situation who might be jailed in the desert for 4 months or 6 months or maybe even longer? They're already suffering. They're already, ex-military guys. They've some of them are officially diagnosed with PTSD and then end up behind bars. Is there any advice you can give, or what would you
Yeah,
say to someone who called you from prison? And I do get calls from
yeah.
prison saying, help me.
A little caveat, you do exceptional work. And I
Mm,
was absolutely blessed to have an opportunity to talk to you. I've followed and watched your work. And so thank you from, my community to you.
no,
And you're
thank you.
right about Vance and Trump.
Mm,
They once some of the many great things that we're seeing happening and the changes. I I've come to believe that illusion is a control, is a construct. It doesn't happen. Our ability to control situations is very limited, and it's really, in my case, it's 6 foot tall and 3 feet wide or whatever it is, and
yeah,
that's about the limit that I'm responsible for and I can control. One of the challenges we have with these people that are going into these risky situations is there is a sense of personal responsibility. You're making a decision to enroll as a mercenary in a role, and you are putting yourself in harm's way knowingly. So there is that which comes, and that comes with a calculation. There's a dollar reward. You want to come home because you've got these plans. You want to come home with contractor money and build up your house or buy your bass boat or whatever it is you want to do.
yeah,
So there's a sense of overarching, I need to take personal responsibility for it, but wow, this is a lot of ramifications, a lot of reaping for what I thought was a little bit of sowing. So that's one series of thoughts.
mm,
And in any situation that is adversity, the best thing you can do is relinquish the sense of control because you've lost it. You're in
yeah,
a prison, and that's that internal fighting against it, particularly with men that are used to being in control of everything in their
mm,
life. Everything's squared away, their underwear squared away, their socks are squared away. They can poop in a bag for 2 weeks and drag that out if they've got to. They know how to
mm,
control their inner systems.
yeah,
And here they are, and nothing is in their control. And I actually think what I've come to learn is it's that inability to control anything, which is a thing that internally drives them crazy. And if you can come to a place of being in that adverse situation, going, I know that people on the outside are doing the best they can with what they got,
yeah,
and I have to trust and have faith that all things will work together for good. And it's really easy saying that sitting in Texas, about to go and have a whiskey and a cigar for the end of my night, and they're sitting in a desert prison. I
mm,
understand that, but it really has been the thing when I've had to help some guys through some situations. Um, and yeah, so there you go.
So surrender to the situation, understand that you can't control anything right now. You don't even have a computer that you can research on. You can't prepare your legal defense. There's really nothing much you can do except trust that people on the outside care for you. And once you've done that, well,
Yeah,
and it's true, a lot of people who have been in there for a long time have had to come to that surrender. And in doing so, live in the moment. And that means,
yes,
if
which
if
is very,
they're
which a
if they're
lot
not
more
in
difficult than
solitary,
people. Yes,
yeah, if they're not in solitary, that means they can start building friendships behind bars and
yeah,
do what they can maybe to help others. I think one of the veterans that we dealt with earlier, they couldn't surrender and they weren't patient and they had kind of given up all hope. He had given up all hope that anything would be resolved. And this was essentially just over a civil case. He wasn't behind bars, but he didn't see that he'd ever be able to leave the country, and he was suffering. His passport was confiscated. He couldn't work. People are becoming homeless on the streets. We have a veteran right now facing homelessness, and many times he's had to sleep just, well, not even sleep, but get on a train and just use the train to rest. So he had given up hope, and I think had, the PTSD had really just got a hold of him. He was no longer thinking clearly, and he grabbed a backpack and tried to hike the desert to escape the country on foot. And I think what happened is he dehydrated on the way and ultimately died trying to
yeah,
escape. So I think had he been more of the surrender and less of the fight or flight or, just needing to be on the move, then his case surely would have been resolved, as all of them are
yeah,
in the end. It's just a matter of being patient. If there is injustice, just being patient and knowing that it will be resolved. So, I mean, that was one of the very sad cases, I think. And other people obviously trying to re-establish their life after the traumatic event, and experiencing the compounding experience, and some of them just never get there. Um, it's
it's
on
very true.
and sort of become more sick, become alcoholics or rely on drugs to numb that pain, and and you see their health decline over a period. So I think that's something that's surely there can be more support in those areas of just transitioning from behind bars or whatever the experience happens to be to a new life without the transitioning through drug abuse.
Yeah. The the concept of work after the war, the greatest work that these people will do will always be internal. And I've learnt that in my own walk. It's not the external things I attend to or the books that I read. It's the time that I sit with myself. And I learnt that from my family. I only really connected with my family 2 years ago in Australia, stolen generation situation. And when I met my brothers for the first time, I realized so much about myself. And what I came to appreciate was the walk slow, think slow, and speak slow. The ability to be able to sit with grief and to sit with tragedy and to sit with um, unfairness, just to be
Mm,
able to sit and come to terms and be at peace with those things. That those things, when you sit with them as opposed to fight against them, you are actually taking their power away to impact you. Now, I know that sounds very tree huggery to a whole bunch of guys stuck in the desert, but it's very much the case. And I learned it from my brothers in the desert, these old men who know what it is, 45,000 years worth of history, who have been massively for the last 250 odd years slaughtered, misrepresented, put to one side solely because of the color of their skin and because they were just in the way of what the Western world wanted to do. So there is nothing fair. They didn't bring any of that upon themselves. We look at a case where someone is stuck in a situation, in a mercenary situation, you have to take some responsibility for how you got there. And often a lot of people won't do that. They won't go, okay, I made some decisions and I'm here. I'm living with a consequence now, regardless of how you get there, your fault or not your fault. If you can come to peace with what you're struggling with, and we've touched this, I won't unpack it anymore. But the work after the war, the greatest thing that you will ever do for yourself and for those that you love is internal. And it will be amongst the hardest work that you'll ever do in your whole life. And it will last until the last days you walk off and walk through the pearly gates.
Mm. And in a society that rewards bravery and silence about issues, I suppose, what do you say to people who don't want to tell their friends, don't want to confide in others, or look weak, essentially, because, it will affect their career opportunities, or, as they see it, it will affect their relationships. Maybe friends or partners will use it against them, weaponize what they've talked about. So do you suggest that they speak to someone like you?
Man, that's a really good question. Really good question. Thank you. Um, man, suck it up, buttercup. Like, it's part of that is the truth. It's like, um, if they leave you because of it, then they were never yours. If they're what you're, I would rather walk with one that loves me than with a group that just tolerate me. I think sometimes in our healing we do have to walk alone. I don't ever think it's ideal. Um, I think with what we do with the Phoenix Collective is we've tried to build a community of people that don't necessarily have a commonality of experience, but they've got a commonality of overcoming. And there's things that we can share and hold each other's and share each other's burden as we walk together. You can't do recovery alone,
Mm.
and you have to deliberately pursue relationships that are going to take you forward. And they are not necessarily the same relationship that you go and have a beer with, or you go and go fishing with. And you have to be particular about those. I think one of the challenges a lot of men have is often their spouse is the only one they talk to. And men and women are different. And if you go home all the time and you're continually laying a burden on your wife and not laying the resolution on your wife, as often happens, men will come home and lay a burden, go back into a situation, resolve it, and never bring the resolution home. What you've got is just this compounding sense of bitterness, alienation, and why are you doing this? And why are we doing this? And we're never going to get ahead and we'll never break through.
Yeah.
And I'm not advocating not being honest with your spouse. I'm actually advocating the opposite, a different level of transparency. Babe, I'm going through something. I need to go and talk to someone because I want to be a better man to come home to you. And if you'll just trust me with this thing, and if you ever want to speak to them, we've had this happen often. I've had women turn up screaming at me, "What the hell have you done to my man? He's just sitting at home crying all the time." Yeah, I just talking about some stuff. Well, he's a big marshmallow. What do? Cuddle him. Just love him. And so it because it's really growth is really uncomfortable, and you'll know it's growth because it doesn't feel like you want to do it, but it's right. You just know you should do it. And if you can find a way to bring your spouse with you, your partner with you, that's really, really important, because in a lot of these stages of recovery, they're left behind and isolated by the very nature of the job and by the nature of not understanding. And as a man, you're wanting to protect them from the horrors of what you see. So I'm not saying you're necessary to divulge that, but you have to give them the ability and the privilege of walking with you in recovery. If they've seen you at their worst, give them a chance to see you trying to be your best
Yeah.
and make it a positive journey together.
Yeah, that's lovely. And how much of a role do you feel that physical fitness plays in recovery? For example, a lot of my prisoners, being ex-military, might behind bars, exercise every day, do push-ups every day, and try to keep that physicality about them. And
Yeah.
then I find that when they're released, if they can keep that up and not fall into a sort of darkness, that they seem to recover faster.
Yeah, and there's lots and lots of work around dopamine release and physical exercise. And they're out in the desert. The sun's good for you, man. Exercising outside, sweating, getting it through. Um, and it's absolute the endorphin rush that you're wanting from either being on the field or that you're trying to get from some sort of alcohol or risky behavior or what you're trying to get there. The dopamine and everything else that you're getting from physical exercise, that neurotropic is more powerful than anything that you'll get pharmaceutically.
Mm.
And a lot of the guys know that, but they come back and they're losing the discipline because they don't have to be disciplined for the first time in their life. And that's where I've seen a lot of guys, when they're in the field, they've got to get skilled up and trained up. They come back and they don't even join a Planet Fitness. They can't get in there for their $10 a month and they won't do anything. And it really is. I notice when especially a guy that's trained all his life, is starting to cycle down on his physical exercise, I always get concerned about what's happening internal.
Mm.
And I think part of it is the level of extreme fitness that we had to be in and the things that we had to do, that it changes with time because your body's been beat up, shot up, broken up, and you need to change that. And often what it is if I can't deadlift 500 pounds, I'm certainly not going to get on the pink weights at the gym. And then when you get a point where you're getting into extreme obesity and your body's inflamed and your joints aren't moving, then there's what actually I found is the issue is the memories, is they remember what it was like and they can't reconcile that with what they can't do now. So being able to help them reposition themselves in a totally new paradigm for the road ahead has been very effective.
Mm. Yes, that's interesting. And I think when you're in that mode, your diet is also changing. You're not eating well. And of course, we know that your gut health and everything else plays a part in your mental health. So yes, I mean, from my experience, if they can keep up with the healthy diet and the physical exercise, at least that's half the battle of not going
Yeah.
down further. If you're struggling here and then you start, not exercising and hiding in your room and eating badly, it just spirals out of control until you can regain it.
Yeah.
Mm.
When we start, often we'll start with simply a couple of rules. Get up at the same time and go to bed at the same time.
Yeah,
2 hours before you go to bed, no blue screens. And if
right.
we can get them to do that,
That's a tough one.
it is. That's probably the toughest one. That
Yeah.
particular addiction is tough. And if we can get them there, then the next one is once you get up at say 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock every day, you're to have breakfast by 8, and it's the same breakfast. It's high fat, high protein, low carbs. And then a gallon of water, half a gallon or a gallon of water, depending on body size. We've found that just with those three simple things, there's probably an increase in the quality of life by 40 to 60%.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you just add things like 20 minutes in the sun,
Mm.
30 minutes worth of exercise, not 7 days a week, but 3 to 5 days a week. If
Yeah.
you can just move, go for a walk, do something for 30 minutes, and then
Mm.
lift some sort of weight for 2 to 3 days, all of these are very obtainable goals and really don't take any more than an hour, 4 to 5 days a week. So then comes back to what is the value of your life? Are you worth an hour of time? And, are you telling me you can't find an hour to look after the state of your soul? And so then we get into, well, why don't I do that? And so that unpacks a range of other things.
Yeah. Yeah. What's holding them back?
Yeah.
I think I'm good on everything. I like to get up at 5 a.m. and the only thing I'll work on is that 2 hours of no blue screen before
Yeah.
bed.
Good luck, sister. Let me know how you go, okay?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it was wonderful talking to you, and I
Well,
think that
thank you.
our viewers will want to learn a lot more about what you do. How long have you been in Texas?
First plane after 9/11. I got on the first plane out of
Wow.
Australia, 9/11, so it's
And
been a while.
you still don't have the accent.
No, I like mine. Well, I spent a couple of years back with my brothers. My accent is now very tame. After spending 2 years with that mob in the desert, man, I was talking like a black fella. So I got, and then I come back my wife's Cherokee, so I'm a black fella. So a red fella marries a black fella in Dallas, Texas. So anyway, my gorgeous wife over there, Southern girl, Southern Belle, is living under a tarpaulin with brown snakes, drinking. I'm telling you, that is a story in and of itself. It was phenomenal.
That does sound interesting. I suppose that's in your book.
Well, yeah, well, yes. I've got to convince her. It's going to be in the next one. I'm doing a book on biohacking trauma, which is actually touching on all the stuff you're doing. So I'm working on 3 or 4 books at the moment. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Amazing. And so thank you so much for joining us. And I think we'll hear a lot more from you. And I'd love if some of our veterans can actually speak with you and contact you with their issues,
that'd be great.
especially if they're in the US.
Yes, and look, when the book comes out, I'm going to ring up a new friend and say, "Hey, come on, let's have a chat. I'll send you a copy, and we'll come on and have another chat again."
Absolutely. I look forward to it. All right. You have a good weekend, and we'll chat again soon.
All right. Bless you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bless you.
Thank you for listening to the Gulf Injustice podcast.